This is part 2 of Rise of Civilization, Ancient Egypt. So we're going to talk about the early dynastic period, with the main site being Harkinopolis. And it is believed that this city shows the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt. Some Egyptologists feel that this is one of the most important things that ever happened in ancient Egypt. And it is thought that Narmer was the first one to do this, became the first ruler, based on what was found on what was called the Narmer palette. It was a slate palette used to apply eye makeup, because both men and women used eye makeup even early on in ancient Egypt. So how do we know this? Well, it is believed that Narmer's deeds are depicted on it. Here you have what is the white crown of Upper Egypt, and Narmer's wearing it. And you see him about to club another man. You also see the falcon god Horus holding a decapitated man, and down below you see people running. And also up on the top, you can't really see it, it's in hieroglyphics, but it is in hieroglyphics, the name Narmer, which meant catfish chisel. Go figure. Okay, and then on the other side of the palette, you had what appears to be Narmer wearing the crown of Lower Egypt, and you see all these people walking around with heads on poles, and then you see all these people have been decapitated, and then down below it is thought that you're seeing a mythical beast with the heads entwined, meaning or being symbolic of the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt. And then down below, what you're seeing is a bull over a prostrate man, meaning that, again, Lower Egypt was conquered. And the other interesting thing about Harkinopolis is that they have found 50 million pieces of broken pottery. So it is thought that there was a whole pottery industry going on, because the living needed pottery, because this is during the time of farming already. And as you can see from the picture, the dead needed pottery as well for provisions that they would take with them to the afterlife. Now, what we think happened is Harkinopolis collapsed, and we think it collapsed because they didn't take care of the resources. What do you need to make pottery? Okay, you need clay. Clay is not a problem. What else do you need? Water. Okay, water is not really a problem because you have the Nile. But you needed a source of heat. And there wasn't a lot of wood in Egypt. So it is thought that they cut down all the wood around the area, and then the city collapsed. So over time, you have some interesting things going on. There was some conflict, and little by little, there was centralization under a king. The king had to prove that he could rule, and he started enforcing his ways on the people. Which brings us to the Old Kingdom. This is the time of the pharaohs. The literal word of pharaoh means great house. The pharaoh was seen as God on earth. So not only did he have to rule the kingdom, but his job was to ensure that the Nile flooded each year. And if it didn't, he was in trouble, because the people would not have food and they would starve, and he would be blamed for it, since it was his job. And it is thought that during this time, and throughout Egypt's history, there was a concept called Mayat. Mayat meant do the right thing. And we're going to talk about it later, but it meant living a good life. So early on, we didn't have a lot of writing, so whatever the pharaoh said was law. We had what was called divine incest. What is divine incest? Well, if you're God on earth, and in order to perpetuate the pharaonic line, you had to have children with somebody in your family. So you would have sex with your mother, your sister, whoever, and then that child would be the successor to the throne. We know that women could rule because there were female pharaohs, but one particular pharaoh who was a woman, everybody knew she was a woman, but yet she wore a beard and a fake penis. So there were 4 dynasties during the Old Kingdom. These were not popular pharaohs, but this was the time of the pyramids, which were tombs built for their legacy, and they were always built during the flood season. Why was that? Well, that's when people weren't having to farm. So we know by this time we started seeing records in hieroglyphics. So we know that the men worked on the pyramids during the flooding season. They were paid in food. And it usually took 100,000 men 20 years to make a small pyramid. And excuse the typo, but during this time, what we know is that sometimes people didn't show up for work, and there were strikes, and there was absenteeism, and sometimes some things never change. So I'm going to give you a brief history of the pyramids. So early on, people were buried just in the ground, as you saw. But as time went on, some of the nobler people were built in what were called mastabas. These were rectangular buildings. Sometimes they were decorated, sometimes they were not. And then they started trying to make pyramids. So architecturally, it was hard to do, and you can see the progression. So this is the Djoser step pyramid. And I can tell you that all were looted in antiquity. So normally, the stuff that Napoleon found, the stuff that was found later on, is all stuff that the ancient Egyptians left behind. And they took all the really good stuff. So here is the bent pyramid, again, showing the progression. And then we get to the nice, smooth-sided pyramids, usually known as the pyramids of Giza, Khufu, and Cheops, both pharaohs. So these are the pyramids of Giza. They're the most famous pyramids. You're going to visit them on your virtual field tour of Egypt. And I can tell you that, having been there, if you want to go to Egypt and more third world countries, go while you are young enough where you can get around. It's hot. There are not escalators. It's not Disneyland. There are no air conditioners. So when I went, I was in my 20s. I was probably the youngest one in the group, and the older people, they couldn't do it. They were passing out. They were falling downstairs. And these are the type of places you need to go when you're young. Of course, that's when you don't have the money, but trust me on this one. Okay, so it took about 2 million blocks each, up to 15 tons, and a lot of labor. So again, the famous pyramids of Giza. I hate to tell you, but they're right on the outskirts of Cairo, so it's not, there's one way to shoot them, meaning photographically, and they're not as far out in the desert as you would think. Okay, so this is what they're like inside. Again, stairs, no escalators, no air conditioning, and it's really hot inside. So the big thing about the pyramids of Giza was that people could never figure out why they weren't symmetrical, in terms of the way they were placed. And it wasn't until recently that we realized that they were astronomically aligned. So the ancient Egyptians were very advanced architecturally, mathematically, medically, and we're just starting to figure some of this stuff out. Where else do you see the pyramids every day? On our money. Might want to look up why that is. Kind of interesting story. So the Sphinx is the oldest and largest structure from the Old Kingdom. Between the paws is recorded a dream that Pharaoh Tutmosis had. Body of a lion, face of a man. Pretty awesome to see up close. And then we have obelisks. Guess where the George Washington Memorial, the idea for it came from. Kind of interesting. And believe it or not, if you go to Paris, again, they actually took a whole obelisk. And you'll see one by the Champs-Élysées. And again, they were very sophisticated mathematically. They knew the concept of zero. You can figure that out yourself in terms of what each symbol represents. Hieroglyphics. Very, very interesting. Written in rows and columns. It could be read from left to right and right to left. And so there were phonograms and ideograms. If you go to Egypt, you'll get what's called a cartouche with your name on it. Now, in the old days, before computers, you had no idea. You know, I would say, oh, yes, I have a cartouche with my name, Kathy, and who knows what it said. It probably said BITCH or something like that. I mean, now you could look it up in the computer. So here's just some more information on hieroglyphics. Do you know I can never remember whether to spell with a or a little Egyptian humor?